A fragrance becomes memorable long before the notes are chosen. It starts with inspiration, with the story you want someone to step into. In this episode, I want to show you how inspiration becomes scent without losing the story along the way. I am Burnett King, the founder of Noble Crown Fragrances, a company dedicated to elevating your space through the power of scent. The Noble Crown podcast is here to talk about the business of building a fragrance brand with tips, advice, and lessons learned that will help you reach your goals faster and learn more about the industry. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast as it helps our channel grow and keeps you in the loop on all things Noble Crown. All right, so in today's episode, we're going to talk about inspiration, scent, and telling a story. So why do so many scents feel interchangeable? Well, often they're chasing trends or they're created for a specific purpose rather than being derived from creative inspiration. Despite being a trained scientist, I believe that fragrances should be about atmospheres, not formulas. So stories should come first. Exact ingredients, formulations, scent notes, all of that stuff can come later. Trust me, I've designed collections both ways, and my creatively inspired fragrances consistently sell better than my formulaic and derived fragrances. Inspiration can really come from anywhere. So a scene, a mood, a character, a feeling. Why starting with scent notes often leads to pleasant fragrances, they can sometimes be forgettable or they can be overly crowded compositions, overly complex. What inspiration creates is direction or a way to go, a momentum. It gives you some ideas and senses around what belongs and what doesn't belong. So I think of it as the creative strength is in restraint, right? You're restraining yourself a little bit creatively once you pick a direction with that inspiration. So let's talk about how to find inspiration, right? So themes, visuals, and emotions. Those are the three things that we're going to cover in this section. So theme. The most important piece of advice I can give you in this entire episode is to think about what a scent represents, not what it smells like. And so I'll break this down a little bit, right? Usually this is some kind of abstract concept. So for me, think about like warlord. Warlord is about power, and I'll get into warlord later on in the episode. But think of abstract concepts or feelings like power, restraint, joy, nostalgia, danger, comfort, any kind of concept like that. That's what you want your scent to represent and how you're going to be able to tell a story to your customer. This theme then limits your choices, right? It's going to start putting you in the direction of what ingredients or scents you want to smell, but it's still telling a story. It's not just being built up from those notes. So the second point is visuals, right? So I tend to associate smells with colors, textures, light, environment. There's some kind of association with each one of the smells or fragrances that I'm building. I like to personify my scents in the form of characters or heroes, especially in my core collections. The story behind the scent is usually centered around that character, what they're doing, how they're feeling, where they're located. All of that kind of combines to create a story. So then visuals actually come in early, right? So you might be thinking, oh, I don't design your visuals until after the scent is already figured out. But I actually like having visual inspiration and visual thoughts before I even blend anything, before I put any ingredients together. Because again, it's giving me more direction. It's giving me hey, when I do build this fragrance, did I get it right? Is it matching the visuals and the feeling and the theme that I started out with? And visuals often prevent that over blending, right? Or muddled compositions. Lastly, emotion. So how do you want your wearer or customer to feel? So the scent should make someone feel a certain way within 3 seconds of smelling it, right? Like if you smell something, you either get a pleasant feeling, a unpleasant feeling, or curiosity, right? Like emotion, you want emotion versus just likability. So yeah, I can like a scent or I can dislike a scent, but I should have a feeling to that scent. Not every fragrance should be easy. Life isn't always easy, right? So if fragrances are representative of moments in life, they don't have to be, but if they are, then you should explore a full range of emotions, not just the joyful ones. So how do we translate story into notes, right? And do it without killing the story? Think of notes as tools, right? Not necessarily the story itself. You have your top and your heart and your base notes. And think of that as like the narrative, right? So I'm starting off here, I'm moving through here, and then I end here. And that's what those scent notes should represent. A note can smell beautiful, but it may not work with the other scents or notes in that story, or it may not represent that emotion that we were talking about, right? If you're trying to portray this emotion, you might have something that smells amazing, but it doesn't work with what you're actually trying to have the fragrance represent. So you can think of building fragrances in categories, right? So floral, like scent families, floral, woody, amber, citrus, etc. But don't restrict yourself to the typical emotion associated with that category. So, for example, a lot of florals are pretty and light and outdoorsy. But have you ever considered what an angry floral would smell like? Right? Think about it. What would an angry floral smell like to you? So, let's take some examples. We're gonna, go through two examples in my core collection, so that way you can see kind of how I build these things. So first is uh, in the Dynasty collection. The theme was for that whole entire collection, right? My collections also have themes to them, not just the fragrances within them, but the entire collection. I like to think about first, and then I start thinking about what fragrances and what emotions, what characters, what themes do I want underneath that collection. So in the Dynasty collection, the theme for the overall collection was foreign beauty, right? And that's from my perspective as an American. Something we wanted to build something that you don't see every day in our typical environment, right? Something that you don't experience or feel, or a persona that you don't see every day in our typical environment. It still had a royalty theme, right? Since this was a core collection. If you notice, all of my core scents have a royal title. The first fragrance that came to mind in the Dynasty collection and I developed right away was Warlord, right? And I actually have it here so you guys can see. So, Warlord, I wanted to think about how people take power. So, not those who already are born with it, right? Those, royal titles, people can be born into royalty. I wanted to think about how does someone take power? How does someone seize power in a violent way? And so, Warlord represents how authority, stillness, dominance all shows up in a scent. This led me to the themes of fire, weapons, outdoors being taken over. And this could have been, an obvious non-crowd pleaser, right? But because it was the first one in the collection, I actually wanted to mix in like a fruit that people would love, which is pineapple. So therefore, I started setting the scene in a humid kind of tropical locale, right? So the next example is from my current collection that I'm working on, which is the Desert collection. So this is the fourth core set. It's a candle only collection for now. And a theme I kept coming back to was the harshness of the desert, right? So all of these scents kind of fit into the desert, but I kept coming back to this theme of harshness of the desert. And so I wanted one of my fragrances to represent beauty and isolation in an empty desert. This led me to cactus flower. So cactus flower is one of the scents. I kept coming back to this imagery of a single white flower blooming on top of a cactus. So literally, like, when you go, sometimes you'll see a cactus and there's just one singular flower. I wanted to think about a white flower sitting on top of a cactus and the amazement that I feel whenever I see something so beautiful kind of developing in a harsh environment. So you can see how I went from theme to visual to emotion here, right? Harshness and isolation was the theme. The visual was a single flower on a cactus. And then the emotion is the amazement at beauty in the harsh environment. So, why is storytelling the difference between luxury and expensive, right? And in a previous episode, we talked about how to create a luxury brand without having tons of money. And one way to do that is with storytelling, right? And intention. You can indicate the luxury and craftsmanship instead of just being an overpriced good by telling the story. Consumers feel something when it's fully considered or conceptualized, even if they can't articulate it, right? They may not be able to tell you why something is luxurious or why they want to spend money on something, but they can feel it if they know the story, they know what went into the item, right? And this applies beyond just fragrances. This can be anything, your brand, interiors, fashion, food, whatever you're selling, right? Whether it's a product or a service, you want to be able to tell a story of how it was made, why it's good for the customer, and what they should feel when they purchase that, right? So that's how storytelling can kind of elevate things from just being expensive into luxury. So, some advice for creators, not just perfumers, but all creators. Start with a sentence, not a formula. So, let your ideas and concepts constrain you, right? So, again, you're going to start with this idea, you're going to start with this story, this concept, and that's going to push you in a certain direction. You're going to get rid of things based off of what that concept is making you think about. So don't let budget and goals and time constrain you. All of that is going to happen anyway later on in the process. The next piece of advice would be to edit ruthlessly, right? And we talked about this in the last podcast episode, right? About time management, but edit ruthlessly. I could have taken Warlord here in a bunch of different directions. If I had just stopped at like authority and strength and power, I dug a little deeper until I had a persona, and then the scenery built out around that persona and that character. If everything fits in your idea, nothing stands out, and neither will your final product. So, in closing, a good fragrance smells nice. A great one says something. So I invite you to experience scent intentionally, right? Think about the feelings, the emotions behind it. Think about the fragrances that you love and how you can just think of them automatically because they make you feel a certain way or they have some story behind them, right? So enjoy the process, really focus on storytelling and focus on the framework of having a theme, thinking about visuals, and then emotion. So thank you for watching the podcast. I appreciate all of the views. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps spread the joy of fragrance to others, but also helps fellow entrepreneurs. If you want to learn more about the fragrances at Noble Crown, check some of them out, you can go to noblecrown.shop, see the inspiration behind each one of the scents. And as always, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.